Okay, I have a Moscow minute that would kind of segue from this. I was going to talk
Yeah, we did
about,
that.
so you've all heard about Alexei Navalny?
No,
Okay.
no, educate me.
Andrei Navalny is Navalny. He is a challenger to Putin in Russia, and he recently was apparently poisoned. He was
Right.
on a flight from, I believe, Tomsk, and he had drunk some tea at the airport. And when he was soon after they took off in the flight, he started experiencing these really bad, painful symptoms, and they had to land the plane in Omsk, another Russian city, and he was hospitalized. And they tried to get him, the Germans tried to help him get out of there so he could get treatment in Germany. And the doctors said he can't, they were very open to it. And all of a sudden they closed down and said he couldn't be transported. And they were, the theory is that maybe they were waiting for the poison, the signs of any poison to disappear, which takes about 3 days. But anyways, he just left for Berlin yesterday. So now he's in Berlin receiving medical care. But apparently this, whether he survives or not is an open question. But Navalny is somebody who is is an anti-corruption activist in Russia, because in Russia there's a lot of corruption, just like there is here. And it's a little bit different kind of corruption. It's kind of like a more centralized, I wouldn't say mafia quite, but I mean, there's quite a history in Russia of poisonings. I mean, for the Litvinenko case in London with the plutonium, and there's a case with the Skripal poisoning as well. Are you shaking your head? Okay, it's just in Russian culture, there's a history of poisoning.
It's just something we do,
It's just, but anyways, he is Navalny's an interesting case because he's an anti-corruption activist. He ran for mayor of Moscow in 2013 or 2012, I believe, and he was one of the top vote getters, but he was defeated narrowly by the approved candidate. But he claimed there was corruption in the election. Whatever. And so he is a challenger to the system. And then he got, he had this, and it may just be, okay, they're saying, well, maybe it was just cirrhosis he had or something. It wasn't necessarily poisoning, but it seems like there was something going on. But he's also, interestingly, he's a Russian nationalist too. So he believes Ukraine and Belarusia and Russia should all be like one unified cultural entity and political entity. And he has said kind of racist things about the Georgians on their southern frontier, that they're basically vermin and they should be, they should just,
that's where Jim draws the line, is racism.
Well, okay, I'm just saying this guy is not all, I think the West probably supports this guy, but he's a Russian nationalist too. So he's even more of a Russian nationalist than Putin. He's criticized Putin for saying, we should not tolerate Ukraine being separate from Russia, and we should fight against the West. But I thought it was interesting that, where does he fit into the picture? Because he's an anti-corruption activist, just like Alex Morris is in his own way. But he's also a nationalist, so he doesn't necessarily align with Western, neoconservative strategic goals.
Except that he's anti-Putin, so I've got multiple tweets.
Right, exactly.
Multiple tweets by Hillary here saying, "Oh, good, he's going to go to Germany for treatment. Oh, that nasty Putin, he poisoned him," and
I don't know if you follow Russian politics at all, but
God no.
Putin's assistant is Dmitry Peskov, and this guy is he's the worst. He's just like, they're very sexist, and they're very they're always obviously trying to make excuses for everything. So like he'll say like, well, he probably had cirrhosis, which doesn't really align with what actually happened. And then it's interesting because they were going to let him out of this hospital, Navalny, and then all of a sudden the doctors like everything like the order came down from above, and they said, well, we can't let him go. He's not safe to fly. He can't fly safely, and we have to keep him here. And then after 3 days, they said, okay, he can go now.
It's like all the cameras weren't working, and the guards were eating pizza, and this guy that was on suicide watch managed to hang himself with a bed sheet.
I mean, there was
imagine
that. There was another opponent. Another
Cool.
opponent to the Kremlin who was murdered in Moscow. This was about 3 or 4 years ago on a bridge right near the Kremlin, and the cameras they were supposed to be operating didn't work during that. So we don't have a monopoly on this kind of stuff. So there's a history in Russia. I mean, the journalists get murdered. I think journalists get mistreated here, if not murdered. I mean, look at the Michael Hastings case here. It was never proved that he was murdered, but you know who Michael Hastings is. He used to be on the Young Turks.
Oh,
and
yes.
He was the guy who exposed Stanley McChrystal and got Stanley McChrystal fired. And then within a couple of years, he was dead. And he was driving his car in Hollywood or whatever, and lost control of it. And he was going like, everyone said he drove like your grandmother, typically. But this guy, all of a sudden, he's doing like 80 miles an hour down a busy street and crashes, and the engine goes flying. And it didn't make any sense. Like it looked like it was a setup.
Well, it was like the 40-year-old lawyer for the DNC lawsuit dropped dead, right? I mean,
right. So I mean, so we're not. I'm just saying this. Wherever you have entrenched power, and whenever you have corruption, and that combination, that's when people are going to resort to anything to maintain that, and they're not going to shy away from murder.
Right. And
so I mean, I don't. I think it's interesting that this guy in Russia is actually to the right of Putin in terms of nationalism. Because Putin's kind of like, well, we can work with the West, we can have independent Ukraine and white Russia and whatever, and this guy is more of a nationalist than Putin himself.
But I mean, didn't Putin just win recently and by a large margin?
Yeah.
So he obviously has the support of the people. So I don't understand how.
Well, it's not obvious because the elections. I mean, who knows how trustworthy elections are?
So how do Russians?
Of course, we're not going to take the. I mean, even though they voted on not just him, but they also voted on all these amendments to their constitution or whatever. But
basically giving Putin.
But none of that matters. It's just the fact that obviously, whoever voted for Putin, then definitely.
I mean, he's a populist. He has a lot of support in Russia. I mean, people. Generally, the person on the street is going to say, he's great because he's made Russia great again. He's helped Russia stand up against the West, right? And I give him credit for that. I think that, but I also think how many women do you see in the leadership in Russia, right? I mean,
but you see, the thing is that we always try to hold people to our standard of living, and I don't think that that's fair. I think that every country has its own culture. They have their own ways of doing things, and I think that what they feel is appropriate. I think that the way that the people actually went out and voted on all of these amendments and all that, they spoke and they said how they want their country to be run and and their culture to be adhered to. You know what I'm saying? And it's not for us to come in and say, well, because they don't have enough women in their legislature, then
I'm not saying it's for us to come in and do that.
I'm just giving my opinion. You're giving your opinion. I'm giving my opinion.
In fact, I think if the West goes in and tries to support these opposition candidates, it's gonna vitiate the situation. It's going to make it worse because then they can say, oh, look, the West is supporting these candidates, right? It's better to just have a hands-off approach. Let these opposition figures do what they're going to do, but we should, Western power should not be involved, because then obviously it becomes subject to the accusation that you're just trying to pursue your own agenda, right? But in Russia, I mean, it's a fact that Putin is from St. Petersburg. Most of his associates are from St. Petersburg. Is from that group, and that's just a fact. And it's a fact that political murder is fairly common in Russia, and there's a lot of corruption. That's a fact. There's a lot of power, a lot of economic power is consolidated at the top, near the top, and also there's not a lot of their economy is basically mostly based on natural resources, natural gas, oil, coal, gold, whatever they have, but they're not, as far as manufacturing everything, they are behind South Korea. I mean, for a country with 11 time zones, they don't really have, they're not the economic powerhouse that they could be. But that being said, I just think it's interesting. It's always interesting to see what's going on in a kind of a parallel universe in Russia. I'm not saying we should support this guy or not support Navalny. I'm speaking of just let's look at what's going on there. And yes, it is different. They have a different culture, and some of it's, we may consider it bad, we may consider it good, and it's different. They look at Putin, looks at us and says, "You don't have democracy," and he's right. Like, you have the electoral college selecting your president, and you have, your majority of people supposedly voted for one candidate, and the other candidate wins. Like he said, you don't have democracy, and you have all this corruption in elections too, election fraud.
Right.
And he's right about that.
When you were describing Russia, like all these issues in Russia, it's like, right, but these are all issues that we have too. The whole corruption and like power being at the top, and it's just in different hands. So instead of being in like, the hands of these oligarchs, these Russian oligarchs, really over on our end, it is these oligarchs, right? But it's these corporations essentially that are at the helm of everything.
I mean, I think the U.S. has more of a tradition of political freedom. So, like, if you go out and demonstrate, like Jim, you did this week, you go out to Suffolk Downs and hold signs and stuff, you can do that. In Russia, it's a little bit more complicated. If you don't get a permit, chances are you will get shut down. It's just the way it is. It's the culture, and people support that. People, like, they're much more law and order minded over there, so they feel like there's an order, and you can't, and society needs this order to operate, and you can't disrupt this order. And
which is also an Asian thing, right? Because Asian, and I hate generalizing like that, but it is more of a cultural thing and that's why supposedly in Asia, with this whole thing with the pandemic, that they were able to handle things differently, because there is like this social like a social thread.
People are more
feels connected.
People are more compliant.
A responsibility or whatever.
Like they'll be willing to work, to do whatever they need to do, and even if it means sacrificing, quote unquote personal freedom. Like if I have to wear a mask, it's not a personal freedom issue. It's like my obligation to society, right?
Exactly.
And you have to remember, Russian history. They were the Mongols invaded, like in whenever it was, the 1300s, or no, before that. They were under Mongol domination for like 500 years. And that's why they developed this very, they made a Kremlin in each city, which is a fortress, to defend against these Mongol invaders. But they also intermarried with them a lot. It took a lot of the culture from the Mongols. So there is an Asiatic influence in Russian culture. And they do. I mean, if you go over there, people are much more like, you can't, like here, somebody will throw litter or something on the street. If you do something like that there, or if you walk, across the street when the light is red, some old babushka is going to grab you and say, "You can't do that stuff. Who do you think you are?" And here it's a different
well, here
mindset.
That granny, that little babushka better mind her own business.
Right. But there, it's very much, people aren't shy about telling you what you should
I'll cross the street where I want to.
And that's good and bad. It's good and bad, because they have, like, you go over there and the streets, the cities are very clean. People are, basically mind your own business.
Different. It's a different society.
It's different
not
society.
The same. Right.
Different. I think
that jaywalking thing is a Boston versus the rest of the world kind of thing to myself. You go to other cities and they look at you kind of weird when you just like cross where you want.
Well, I know, like in Germany, you stand there. Everyone, if there's no cars in sight and the light's red, people will just stand there and they'll wait till the light turns green. you know, and then
well,
they
it's
cross.
just like in Germany, how public transportation is essentially, it's the honor system. I mean, obviously they do have people that go and check sporadically, but essentially they expect for you to pay your toll and, you know, and do the right thing. But
I was there for 9 days.
No one's gonna like tell you, hey, you didn't pay this. Like,
yeah, no one's gonna check you. This, and that would never work here. That would never fly here because everybody would just be like, fuck it, fuck the system, right?
I think it was the same in Copenhagen. I think I remember just kind of going like, well, how do they know I'm on this platform? But how do they know I paid? You know, it was that kind of thing. There was no gate where you had to check your, you know,
So anyway, so kind of wrap it up with this thing. I'm interested in how the Western press covers this Navalny case because he fits into the narrative because he's anti-Putin, but he's also a Russian nationalist, even more than Putin is. So you know, they may they have to worry about what they wish for because if Navalny actually took over, he could be worse than Putin. So
the media having to watch out what they wish for? No, really?
Well, I'm interested in how they portray the story because I think they're a little ambivalent. If Navalny, like if he was like Gary Kasparov, the chess player, who's another political figure in Russia, and he's very like Western. You know, he wants to have like capitalism, and he wants to he's basically exactly who the neocons and neoliberals would want to have running Russia. Whereas Navalny is kind of a more ambivalent figure.
I guarantee that you have more knowledge about Russia than anyone CNN or MSNBC is going to have on to talk about this guy. And they're just going to be, Hillary says this guy's anti-Putin, so we got to talk about this poisoning and how bad Putin is. You know?
Well, I don't even know that much, but it doesn't take. I mean, if you read a little bit, you can learn a lot pretty quickly. And it's just I always think the parallels are interesting.
Well, but that also depends on who you read, right?
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, Russia to me is always interesting because it's kind of like a parallel world.
Sure.
We have the Wild West. They have the Wild East. You know, they have their society. We moved westward. They moved eastward. And the way they treated their minorities was a lot different than the way we treated our minority or our indigenous peoples. So there are a lot of parallels in terms of we're continental empires basically. We're North America. They are Europe, a lot of Europe and a lot of Asia. So there's parallels, and I think it's always elucidating to see what's going on over there versus what's going on over here. Not there are differences and everything, but that's my Moscow minute. I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Minute.
Jesus.
What do you think, Casey?
Minute.
Minute asterisk.
Yeah. All right.
Hey.